Janus Motorcycles. I've been very familiar with the brand for years now. I've made a few videos on their bikes in the past, and I was pretty heavily critical of the bikes, while in that more recent one over a year ago now, I had, I guess what you could say, a change of heart. Well, this bike here is not just your ordinary Halcyon 250. It's actually Devin's, a previous Janus employee who opened up his own business in Goshen, Indiana called MotoCult. Long story short, he has developed performance upgrades and packages for these Janus 250s and for others that utilize that same CG250 engine that Janus does. And I think he's also currently working on upgrades and options for the Janus 450, but I think all of that is still in the developmental stages. So a few months ago, Devin and I got to talking and decided, well, why don't we make a video showcasing how much of a difference his performance parts make to this Janus 250. What we have done here is that he's allowed me to not only take his bike out, which was bone stock mind you, put a few hundred miles on it, record some data, and then compare that to the exact same bike of his, but this time around he has installed all of the performance parts that he offers in the Stage 4 Plus kit. Not only that, but he's also put on the upgraded headlight, the tail light, and the power rear brake kit. Also, the most recent product in MotoCult's lineup, a proper center stand for the bike. In fact, I'm the first one to ever try out the center stand outside of a prototype, which is really cool. But before I start this video, I do have a few disclaimers and caveats that I have to address. For one, no, I am not sponsored, partnered, affiliated, nor was I paid by Janus or by the company MotoCult. Not in the past, and not now. So any opinions, any data, comments, concerns that I have will be directly my own and no one else. Another thing, there may be some Janus owners, fans, maybe even current employees that think that modifying the bike with performance parts is nothing outside of pure blasphemy. There's also going to be those who think it's utterly stupid to modify such a small displacement motorcycle like this in the first place, arguing things like, well, if you wanted a faster bike, you should have bought insert whatever bike here, or whatever other form of detracting style of comment that they may come up with. Look, guys, at the end of the day, none of this matters. People buying a Janus know that it is a small, quirky motorcycle from the get-go with not a whole lot of power at its disposal. Look, think of it this way. No one realistically buys a K car like a Suzuki Cappuccino, or even something like a 90s Miata, modifying it thinking that it's ever going to have the power of a Dodge Viper without some sort of direct engine swap. No one is that out of touch, at least one would hope. But people, no matter what car or bike, still wonder the possibilities that are out there that could enhance, modify, or elevate that vehicle to perform better for maybe more well-rounded daily riding, or what everyone usually does is just try to increase the horsepower as much as possible. If I wasn't so curious about this exact same thing, I would have never bothered with my Project Royal Enfield series. But now, with that bike as modified as it is, I wouldn't change it back to stock if you paid me. What people decide to do with their bikes, cars, and their money shouldn't really matter to you. I mean, why get bothered out of someone else's expense? It's just wasted energy. It's like screaming into an empty room for hours. There's no point. No one's around to hear you, and even if there was, they'd probably just tell you to shut up. Yes, so now that that whole long, drawn-out thing has been covered, which I felt is still necessary to bring up, what exactly is the Stage 4 Plus kit? Well, a ton of stuff is included in this kit. A Nibi carburetor, performance clutch springs, a true 250cc power cylinder, oil cooler, performance head, a full exhaust, 292 power cam, a 43-tooth rear sprocket, and more. All of this, and you're only paying, by the time of making this video, about $1,500. MotoCult does offer a service where they will install the parts on the bike for you, for an additional fee obviously, and this fee does vary depending on which kit you decide to go with. But if you do decide to install the parts on your own and maybe just need a little bit of help, he does offer a very informative install video on his channel, which of course will be included in the description. Now, I don't know how much you guys are familiar at all with my Project Royal Enfield series that is technically still ongoing on my channel. Well, in that series, I have documented performance upgrades one by one on my classic 350 using a device called a Dragy. It gives an excellent amount of data on things like 0 to 60 numbers, the slope or grade of the pavement, and it'll even show numbers in 10-mile-an-hour increments. It's an excellent tool to see how these parts affect the speed, acceleration, and otherwise the performance of your bike or car in a more realistic world setting. But for those of you who love and want dyno tests, rest assured I do have that information to show you as well in due time. Just be patient. On a stock Janus Halcyon, you probably already know by now, it's a slow, easy-going motorcycle. It's not meant, or was it ever built, for things like highway travel, or even that of lower American freeway speeds. It's not a true 250cc bike like you might expect considering the name of the bike being Halcyon 250. No, in reality, it's a 229cc bike with only 14 horsepower and 11.65 foot-pounds of torque. The Janus website claims that you can reach speeds of 70 miles an hour, but that's arguably misleading. I mean, okay, maybe if you weigh 140 pounds with full gear on, and perhaps that motorcycle is well broken in, you maybe could hit 70 on a regular basis. But in reality, guys, expect on a stock bike the top speeds to be more around 65 on flat, solid ground. But let's talk numbers here. Surprisingly to Devin, and myself really, I was able to consistently hit 0 to 60 numbers off of a stock bike at 20 seconds. And this is of course all tracked and documented on 5 valid results with that Dragy device. The most interesting part about this isn't even the 0 to 60 as a whole, it's actually when you delve into the details of those results. You see, getting from 0 to 50 off of a dead stop takes approximately 10 seconds on its own. Okay, fine, but it almost takes that exact same amount of time to go from 50 miles an hour to 60. Attempting to go any faster than 60 miles an hour is an absolute chore, to say the least. And that brings me to my next subject. What is the Halcyon's top speed? I've read articles, reviews, watched people's videos online where they have claimed to go as fast as 70 miles an hour off of a stock bike. Most people, however, claim realistically that 65 miles an hour is the fastest, which technically coincides with me because 65 is the top speed I was able to hit on semi-flat ground. Have I been able to hit 70 myself like the website claims? Yeah, but it was on a good downhill slope, so it is completely disingenuous for me to then claim that as a top speed. Now keep in mind, it takes all of the bike's might and effort to hit those 60 plus mile an hour numbers. I've already kinda stated that. Also, in case you didn't already know or figure out by now, the footage you're watching, these speedometers are criminally inaccurate. At least on earlier models. This bike in particular is a 2020 model. It shows you're going 80, but in all reality you're maybe pushing 50 according to the GPS. Which kinda sucks because that means I have to always have my phone mounted onto this bike. Okay, so now with the numbers off of a stock bike, how do things change with that Stage 4 Plus kit? Now, I took the same roads I did with the stock bike to do these 0 to 60 numbers, just to make sure I wasn't unintentionally influencing any of the results from the Dragy. So on average, based on 5 valid results with the Stage 4 Plus, I was getting 0 to 60 numbers of 11.06 seconds, damn near half the amount of time versus that of a stock Janus 250. That is unbelievably impressive. Going into those results in detail, it's even more apparent when you see that most of the time I was getting to 50 miles an hour around 7 to 8 seconds, while taking only a few more seconds to hit that 60 mile an hour mark. The power and difference between this and a stock bike is night and day, and even that doesn't truly express how massively different this bike feels versus that of a stock one. The top end power has also vastly changed. On flat grounds, I was very easily hitting 70 miles an hour with no issues. Afterwards, the bike does kind of struggle to hit higher numbers. I did perform a top speed test, sort of. Allow me to explain. So, the fastest I was able to hit and be mildly comfortable was about 77 miles an hour. It for sure has enough power left in its engine to push 80, if not more, but at speeds like this, things get a little too twitchy for my liking. And quite frankly, I got autoimmune diseases, so I probably shouldn't be doing semi-risky stuff like this on a bike with such slim tires anyway. In theory, yes, this does mean that you can take this bike on certain American highways, toll roads, and freeways. Of course, depending on where you live, and rider skill does play a huge factor in that as well. I did it myself on US 20, which has a 65 mile an hour limit at times, and I did totally fine with no issues at all. I was totally comfortable riding at these speeds and could do it all day long if I had to. But I can never do this on a stock bike without going significantly under the speed limit and of course pissing off a ton of drivers in the process, putting myself, most importantly, in a pretty dangerous situation. These modifications definitely make the bike more doable as a daily rider. Like anywhere that I would take my classic 350, for example, I could take the Janus with that Stage 4 Plus and be totally fine. Now, okay, for those anxiously awaiting dyno results, here you go. This is a graph that Devin sent me of a Janus 250 with this exact same Stage 4 Plus kit versus that of a stock 250. It's immediately evident as to why the bike is so much quicker. According to the graph, a stock bike keyed in at 11.94 max horsepower at 6.4 RPMs, with the max torque at 11.2 at 5.04 RPMs. The Stage 4 kit completely blows these stock numbers out of the water, achieving a max horsepower of 20.22 at a far higher 8.41 RPMs, with the max torque at 14.49 at again a higher RPM of 6.85. Not only that, but it's clear based on that graph that the power delivery is far smoother with that Stage 4, while the stock bike starts to kind of dip quite a bit past 7,000 RPMs. So basically with that Stage 4 Plus, you're achieving almost double the horsepower with near 25% more torque. It's important to note this is based off of whatever style of dyno that MotoCult is using, whether those results reflect a dyno based off engine crank or the rear wheel is not something I particularly know. Either way, the graph still shows a ton of informative information. So basically, it's abundantly clear that this kit makes the bike kinda gnarly for a 250, but there is still more that needs to be said with how this Stage 4 Plus has changed the bike as a whole. For one, the motorcycle is so much easier to start, especially when it's really cold out. Most of the time I had this bike, the weather was fluctuating between, say, 20 to 50 degrees. On a stock bike, it took a fair amount of finagling with the choke and the throttle to keep it started. Many times I came across the stock motorcycle cutting out on idle or simply taking forever to warm up to the point where you could ride it. Of course, take into consideration it is winter at this point. Either way, with that upgraded kit, the bike not only starts significantly easier in cold weather, but I didn't have to mess around with the choke and throttle anywhere near as much when I was starting the bike, which is never a bad thing. These motorcycles are super cold-blooded, so anything to improve starting procedure is a huge plus in my book. If you haven't already noticed, the bike is also far louder and much more aggressive sounding, thanks to, of course, that new full exhaust. It's not, say, obnoxiously loud like a straight-pipe Honda Grom is, but it's definitely loud enough to really catch the attention of everyone around you, as if the looks of the bike didn't already do that by itself. I personally think it sounds amazing, like music to my ears, but I do enjoy louder exhaust anyway, so I don't necessarily know how that means for you. Here's a few sound clips to give you a good idea of how it sounds versus that of a stock motorcycle. Another thing that is immediately evident the moment I started riding was the upgraded clutch springs. So on a stock bike, when you take off from a stop, there's a fair amount of clunkiness going on, as well as clutch chatter. The performance springs definitely help keep that in check and minimize the clutch from slipping, especially after all these modifications have been installed. And it took me a few minutes of riding to realize that there was also a difference when I was shifting throughout the gearbox. The best way I can describe it is that there's more of a direct feeling as you're shifting. Like when you shift, you know immediately that it is catching into that next gear, and sometimes you can hear it click during that shift. Whereas before on a stock motorcycle, the shifts were so smooth you can hardly tell if you were actually shifting. The only real downside to this kit that I was able to notice is that it sucks up gas a bit more, but honestly, anytime you increase horsepower on any vehicle, you're bound to have an impact on mile per gallon anyway. These bikes don't necessarily have a great gas tank as it is, so you're probably going to be filling up, or at least switching to reserve, around 70 to 90 miles, depending on how much you're banging on that gas. Another incredibly important thing that needs to be brought up is that the stock bike is very buzzy or vibraty in the upper RPM range. When I took the bike out for an hour-long ride, my hands were hurting so bad because of the vibration in the handlebars. Now, I do have arthritis, so that doesn't necessarily help things, but still, that buzziness by the end of things made it almost unbearable. When I got the bike after the Stage 4 Plus kit, I noticed that for whatever reason, that buzzy sensation and the vibrations being far more tolerable. So much so that I was able to ride this bike for hours on end without having really any pain in my hands, like I was with the stock bike. Now, of course, Janus does offer a weighted bar end kit on their website, and I would have loved to have seen just how much that would have improved the motorcycle, but either way, for whatever reason, the Stage 4 Plus kit helped keep that buzziness down to where it didn't affect my arthritis in my hands, and that is a godsend in and of itself. There are other things I wish I could have talked about, like the massively better and far more improved larger headlight that MotoCult offers, as well as the power brake kit and upgraded taillight. But I think that this is probably best suited for a separate video, since the video I'm talking about now is mostly geared towards performance with acceleration and speed. Although I really want to bring up now the center stand. I'll be honest, it's kind of tricky to use, and that's really because the center stand is so short in length. Basically, the shorter the stand, the harder it is to prop up a motorcycle. So when you go to put up the 250 on a stand, you have to use a bit more muscle than you otherwise would on most motorcycles. Perfect example is a Yamaha VMAX, a bike that I previously had. I could pop that thing on the center stand all day long with no issues and very little effort. But this Janus 250 center stand is a little bit tricky. You may say, why not make the stand longer? And that's because it's really not possible without smacking into the rear tire or its fender. It is what it is. It's still extremely useful for the times you do have to service your bike. So let's wrap things up here. I don't want to take up any more of your time than I already have, but of course there's a lot to discuss in this video and a lot to show you all. And I hope that I was able to give everyone good information on this Stage 4 Plus kit and just how much it's going to dramatically change your riding experience on these Janus 250s. Honestly, for me, it's definitely been an eye-opening experience, and going forward, if I ever were to buy a Janus 250, which is still very, very possible, especially, of course, if I can get my hands on one of those rare Phoenix bikes, I would have to, without a doubt, have this Stage 4 Plus kit installed on the bike. Here's the thing. Yes, I did have a lot of fun with the stock motorcycle, but after that Stage 4 Plus kit was installed, I was having the time of my life. And even when it was riding around in like super cold weather, the excitement, the joy that I was having off of this modified Janus brought me back to the reason I rode motorcycles in the first place. It brought me back to 12 years ago off of my first motorcycle. I don't think I could get that feeling ever again if I were to have a stock Janus 250. Which basically means at this point that MotoCult and their damn Stage 4 kit completely ruined the bikes for me because I can never own a Janus 250 without it. And that's going to wrap up today's video, everyone. Thank you so much to MotoCult. I'm going to tag their social links and their website in the description, of course. And thank you to everyone who has supported my channel, as weird as the upload times can get sometimes. Even though I have a small channel, it means a lot to me that I have such dedicated, wonderful fans out there that have been around for years upon years now. Here's to 10,000 followers and more fun content like this in the future. Take care, everyone, and as I always say, ride safe out there.